Sam, defend your team, because they haven't won.
Strap yourselves in, it's another 1 hour episode.
Oh, yeah.
Spike defused.
Another episode of Press 4 to Defuse, your spot for Valorant esports news and discussion. I'm Darth Mike. We've got Sam as well, the usual suspects, and a very special guest this week, a firm friend of the show, making his third, maybe fourth appearance on the show.
Something like that.
But he's got a very new gig as Fnatic's new strategic coach. It is Anderzz. Anderzz, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic. Not much to complain about with the excitement going on. So happy to be on the show with the new title intact.
New title indeed. We were talking about it a little bit, but you're adjusting to an EU sleep schedule here, so we're dragging you out of repose to come chat with us. Sam, how you doing this week?
I'm just getting off of an NA schedule. Went to bed at like 4 a.m. this morning after casting night. So I'm exhausted, but I do understand the struggle. The grind is real. And I'm really happy to be back on the show with actual good internet, not worrying about my camera cutting out and various other things. So all around, I think it's a good week.
We're very happy that you have fiber. And also, you were showing us your collection of swords earlier. All in all, a very interesting week for Sam. But let's get into the news. Speaking of interesting weeks, our first news story, very exciting. It's about this guy right here. Got announced as a strategic coach of Fnatic. We're gonna talk about this a whole lot more when we go into the interview section, because we've got a bunch of questions for you, Anderzz. But I guess just right off the rip, what does this gig mean to you, man?
I mean, it's pretty crazy. Like it's one of those things where like you obviously whenever you're working in this space, like aspire to join a tier 1 organization, and there's like more or less no organization that's more tier 1 than Fnatic. I mean, they've been around since 2004 or something like that. It's a 2 decades old organization. And so to not only finally make it to that top level, but to make it with an organization with as much history as Fnatic is like, you can't ask for more. It literally doesn't exist.
It's just so exciting, man. Congratulations again. We're going to talk about that a whole lot more in the interview section, but for now, we'll blow past it and go into the next news story here, because I don't want to blow our load too early on some of the questions that we've got lined up for you here.
Okay.
Gotta keep them waiting. Gotta keep them waiting. Gotta tease it.
So
our next story here.
Okay.
Don't worry
Jesus,
about it.
man.
Kadavra has been benched from Alliance. He will be out of Alliance as they look to rebuild their team, not quite having the results that they were hoping for in the last run of VCT. What do we make of this, Sam?
It's interesting because I think that Fnatic, look at me. Alliance had benched like 3 of their players. I still remember seeing Banks tweeting something like, we're looking for like a smoker, an IGL, and a something else. So they're basically rebuilding at this point. It's not just Kadavra. Obviously, this is now the latest one. But it is coming into an almost entire rebuild, because while they had some pretty decent results, obviously it wasn't what they were hoping to accomplish. I don't know. I suppose there's the 2 options, right? So you like maybe change one player and see how that goes, or you just go, all right, cool, we're gonna scrap half the team and rebuild. And I think for a team as new as Alliance, it's not the worst idea. Okay, it sucks for the players, but hopefully this will net them some better results in the new year. Because I don't think they made LCQ. I don't think so. So this is like fully looking on to next year.
I believe that's accurate. Yeah.
Standings, but that sounds about right. Anderzz, what do you make of it?
I mean, it makes sense. Like, given the way that they've performed this year, I would have been fairly surprised if they didn't go into overhaul mode. So the fact that that's been finalized and sort of confirmed is like, yeah, we sort of expected this to happen if you were following the team at all. I mean, all that I knew of Alliance as a brand preceding them jumping into Valorant was like, oh yeah, these are the guys who win internationals in Dota. So the fact that they're coming into this game and have really failed to find any footing, like, I'm sure that the organization isn't settled with that by any stretch of the imagination and is going to want to chase a lot more success.
Just to confirm, they are definitely not making it to last chance qualifier. They have 10 circuit points from the first EU Masters run, where there was a fair amount of excitement about them, right? Like, they came out as a debut roster and like, oh, they could do something. And then they didn't anymore. which is always a bummer. This is always an interesting one for me to watch as an org, just because it's Banks's team at this point, and so it's kind of cool to see, people who spend so much time in front of cameras on desks, analyzing, talking, casting, to then get a chance to build a team. It's always kind of cool to see someone shift into a different role in that regard. So I'm always curious to see what they're going to do. We'll have to keep an eye on what they bring into the team going forward. But yeah, the results definitely didn't match to expectations, to say the least. Moving on, another team that's really not living up to expectations, FPX. This was the darling child of the EU scene for a hot second, up until VCT actually started to happen, and they repeatedly pooed the bed. So now they're cutting 2 players. Demasic and Shadow are out. We don't know who's going to be replacing them yet. Demasic was the most recent addition to this roster, the last time they tried to fix all of their issues with the roster change, and well, it didn't work. What do you think about FPX there, Anderzz?
Oh, man. FPX is one of the teams where, I could get actually ranty about it. I think that there's some serious stuff going wrong with that team at the moment.
We need some Reddit clips. Go on.
It's like if you look at FPX's performance in the last major event, what the hell were they doing? You can look at their compositions, and I think I don't know if I publicly tweeted it or if it was just to some of my North American players at the time, but I literally said this is the single most confused composition I've seen in any Valorant official to date. There's no unified game plan. I genuinely have no idea what the hell they're doing. So the fact that I can say that, and then they turn around and think the solution is player swaps, reduces my confidence even more. They're lost in the sauce. The plot is so far away from them. Calling them lost is almost generous at this point. I have no idea what they're doing, especially when you look at the players that they've benched. They're getting rid of a strong support player and Dima, who, how does that make sense? You're getting rid of one of your best fraggers who's filling their role extremely effectively and one of the best support players in your region. Could it possibly be that you're not leveraging them correctly and not that the players need to be swapped? Just saying.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to that. The interesting thing as well was last time FPX disappointed, they moved Yonta out, right? They got rid of their coach, and that was the change that they brought through, and that was the way they thought that was going to work. And I don't know, man, maybe they're missing him. A little bit of the leadership, a little bit of the direction there, because FPX has not really gotten stronger since he left. If anything, they've just gotten to be less of a storyline because there's just a lot less of a spotlight on them. What do you make of this roster here, Sam?
I think it's really heartbreaking that they missed LCQ by 5 or 10 points or something equally stupid. Yeah.
Half a slot.
It's so crazy. Oh, it's just so sad. But changes need to happen, but like you said, they've been making some weird decisions, not just in terms of players and coaching staff, but in game as well. Every time you watch their games, you can see that they have strong players that play really well, but they don't feel like they really coordinate well, and they're not quite sure what exactly it is they're doing. There's so much potential on that team, and I feel like it's just, I don't know, I'm kind of echoing exactly what Anderzz said, yeah, but it's just not being leveraged properly. And I feel for Demasic and Shadow as well, because now they got to go find new teams. And in this current climate, that is quite a difficult thing, particularly here in EU at the end of the year when orgs aren't really looking for new players. You might see a team start building maybe November, December in the ramp up, but for the next couple of months, it's a pretty dry period. You've got your LVP series, which is relatively small. You got your Rix monthlies, also relatively small. There isn't big investment for orgs to make. So these players are going to be sitting doing what for the next couple of months? It's not a great situation all around.
I will say, hopefully, I think they're benched at this point, not out of their contract. So hopefully they've got generous benching clauses, and it's not like one of those clauses where you're benched, you get $200 a month. Good luck. We're holding your contract for a year. But hopefully, it's a situation where they can take some time to search out a new team and be ready when teams are rebuilding, likely around the start of the year, and investing back in. I do also want to clarify, I don't actually know. FPX would have needed to jump up 2 spots to guarantee to have a spot at Last Chance Qualifier, because Forza only gets in if a team from EMEA wins Berlin, and that's not going to happen. So we don't have to worry about that. Anyway.
Fnatic's going to win now. They have Anderzz. What do you mean?
On to the next. Fnatic's not in it.
I was going to say, if we were there.
Oh, shit. Not yet.
Yeah,
Come
Fnatic
on.
definitely can't win it. They missed that opportunity. That's why they signed this guy. They're like, shit, we missed Berlin. Call the Anderzz button. They flip on the spotlight.
Oh wait,
here.
we have Ascend and CNET. All right, no, we actually fine. Don't worry about it.
We also do have Doom Bros in the chat right now. Who
Doom. Oh, hey Doom Bros, what's good?
Of FPX. So we were just talking a lot of shit about your team. Sorry, bud.
I was gonna say,
yeah.
I love you. I'm sorry,
but you know, such is how it works. It says he thinks the majority of EU is rebuilding as we speak. So I tend to agree to that. Like, now is the time to get cut if you're gonna get cut, because a lot of jobs are opening up, and now is where everyone starts to mix and match. Moving on across the water to the region that will win Berlin. Stellar and Thief are free agents.
Korea?
Speaking of people being stuck in contract jail for a while.
I was waiting for that.
Opening up. Stellar and Thief are free agents. They're unsigned. They can get teams. We kind of knew this was going to happen. This was actually leaked in a report, I think, by Gidis at one point about it being, that they were going to be free agents. So I'm curious to see where they'll wind up. Don't know that this is much of a news story since they already benched and all this stuff, and we'll see where they end up. Just going to kind of move on past that one, I guess, unless anyone has any hot takes on Stellar and Thief. No? Open up the floor.
Really.
I mean, the
sliding on.
The closest thing to a hot take I have is that me and the Virtuoso guys have played Stellar on like 6 different teams, and I think we beat him every single time. So it always felt bad because he was like a revolving door, and it literally got to the point where he would load into lobbies with us and in chat say, "Oh shit, it's you guys." Like, we literally have a clip of that happening at one point. It's a funny little joke that we had going. But hopefully he lands on his feet. He's a great player. I mean, he just needs to find a roster that he slots into well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a good dude too. Nice guy. Moving on. Cloud9 announced that they are, or didn't announce, but it's been revealed that they are looking to acquire an academy team. So apparently this is just the new trend in Valorant. Everyone's getting in on it. A lot of the orgs are getting in on it. We now have TSM Academy. We now have T1 Academy. Cloud9's feeling left out. We want Cloud9 Academy. Honestly, based on what they've been doing with their roster moves in Valorant, I figured they'd just like sign 2 more players, have like an 8 or 9 person roster, and call that an academy. Because that's basically how C9 Blue's been functioning. Still, what do we make of the academy teams here, Anderzz? I'm curious to hear your take.
My take is that I'm more interested at what the movement for academy team signals. Like, do a bunch of these orgs have insider info that we're moving to franchise? Because I'm not sure how you can substantiate throwing a bucket of money at a team that isn't allowed to actually compete in your region otherwise. Like, there are some serious pieces in motion here, and a lot of my interest is less about the teams themselves and more about what it is indicative of.
I mean, if you look at the teams that have signed them, right? Orgs like TSM, orgs like Cloud9, orgs like T1 are presumably the kind of orgs that have very close relationships with Riot, with League Ops, with whatever's coming in the future. So if anyone's going to have the inside track on what the plan is going into next year or 2 years from now, it would be these orgs. So I think that's a pretty good point to highlight. What do you think, Sam? We move into having like a franchise league with full academy support?
Probably. I mean, C9 was also the first an all-female team, which was right after the FTW tournament, way before Game Changers was announced. I'm talking like 5 or 6 months before we knew that Game Changers was coming. So if they do have it seems to me that they're an org that has an inside track, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if that is the direction that we're going in, because I know that now some of the VCT teams have been able to participate. Like, we saw some of them in the NSG Summer Champs, because like that period of not being able to compete in other tournaments had like expired. So now they were able to compete again. But it creates that weird thing of like, okay, our academy team can compete in like NSG tournaments and nights, I guess. Maybe community gaming, but they can't compete in VCT at all, which is where the bulk of your experience is going to come from. That to me makes absolutely 0 sense. So I think the only answer to that is we're probably moving towards some kind of a franchise, like Anderzz said. There's got to be a reason. Otherwise, why would you be investing into it?
Now, this is an interesting point that you added on into the to the next bracket in our outline. I think I completely missed this story, Sam. So why don't you take this?
Okay, so in the LVP, it's a Spanish tournament, or Spanish TO, and they have during tac pauses, they will go and listen to player comms, which is wild. I think there's like a 2 or 3 minute delay. Cool, fair enough. But if your opponent is watching the stream and listening to your tac pause isn't what you're going to do in the next round. It's how you're going to be playing out the next few rounds. It's your game plan. And then they just put it on the stream for everyone to hear. What? It's just crazy. And then the tweet that Durka had. So one of the teams just started singing in the tac pause, and that was the comms, because they were just like, you're not going to record our comms. It's not happening. It's just the weirdest situation.
What do you make of it, Anderzz?
I mean, we're in it. Like, Durka's clip of people singing is us. So
yeah.
you can see, like, it's just a really weird call from the TOs. Like, I understand the desire to create like super cool content and give a unique insight to the teams, but like there are certain lines you just don't cross from a competitive integrity standpoint, and that's one of them.
I think the trick to doing this kind of content, because there was a bit of this controversy in CS as well when Blast was airing some comms, that became a real big concern for some of the players. The trick is you need to have heavy editorial oversight, and you need to have a degree of trust between players and TO on it. So it doesn't really work when it's sort of a minor association with the TO. It's one thing if you're in some sort of a partnership or a franchise or that kind of thing where there's a certain degree of a relationship built in trust. Because what you have to do as a TO, if you're airing this kind of content, is you have to make sure it doesn't include any sensitive information. You can't be saying like, all right, here's going to be our game plan. Like, here's how we're going to adjust. Here's what we'd like to do on this map. That you can't air out to the world. It's terrible for teams. What you want to do is you want to get like the emotional moment, right? You want to get the coach giving the pump up speech. That's fine. No one cares. Like, no one's going to steal your pump up speech. And if they are,
the brave speech, yeah.
So you go for that. Go for the pump up speech. Go for the big moments. Go for like the audio when someone's clutching and like the team's freaking out. That's what you want to air on stream. That's big hype build up moments. Obviously, it's cool as an audience to get insight to what teams are doing tactically. But yeah, no one's going to want to give you that. So it just really hamstrings your own tournaments, if you will. Silly situation, and it's again a very tricky one, because in my eyes it's something that you can really only do when there's a degree of trust between the teams that are entering and the tournament organizer, because that does require sensitive access. One more note that we have here, which is that the ESIC is working with Riot to extend their investigations into Valorant. So we don't know exactly what that's going to mean. I know everyone's very excited about it. There hasn't been confirmation that Riot will punish people per ESIC's statements, right? Like, that hasn't been confirmed, but they have said they're working with Riot, which is very encouraging, that hopefully consequences for match fixing will actually follow players through to this new game, which I was getting real pessimistic about. I'll be honest with you. I've been pretty pessimistic that people were going to face any sort of consequences, but I'm happy to see it. We got any hot takes on this one here, Sam?
Not really. Just I hope that it does carry through, and that Valorant doesn't go, all right, we'll help you find these players. Okay, they're banned from your game. You can keep playing it now. That's chilled vibes. I hope that there is some sort of follow-up, because like consequences and repercussions, the shit that you do have consequences, and it would be really awful to have that image of, well, if you did something wrong, we're now a non-extradition country. So if you've done something wrong, just come on over to Valorant. It's all good, man. Just please no.
The Virgin Islands of the community. Just come hide out in the BVIs. Valorant, British Valorant Isles. Is that how it works? I don't know. What do you think, Anderzz? You ready for the ban hammer to come down?
I mean, it's weird because it's like, I don't want to sound sadistic, but at the same time, like, there's a certain level of like excitement and pleasure you get out of people who do something that negative to the ecosystem being caught and punished for it. Like, yeah, like
Schadenfreude.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, like, it's not that I enjoy their suffering. It's that I care so much about this industry and this space that them getting their dues just feels right. Yeah, and I mean, there's some jokes I can throw here, but I'm gonna hold myself off because it's a little presumptuous.
There are some of them where I'm pretty sure I was forced to watch their games back in CS that they were throwing that I will feel happy about getting banned. There are also some where I don't. I'm sure there are players who I don't think are match fixing that I'm going to find out did, and it's going to break my little heart. But you know, such is the way it happens. To mess around is human, to find out is divine, as the meme that Sir Scoots is so fond of posting goes. But let's move on from the news. Let's move on to our most exciting piece of news, which is your new job. We're gonna ask you some questions about said new job and get into a little bit more detail about what you're doing for Fnatic, what this gig means to you, what you're gonna be bringing in. You know, the whole thing. You're our guest of honor here, so we're gonna shine the spotlight in. First thing I would love if you could tell us is just, how did this gig come about? How did this connection happen, right? Because we know you've been a friend of the show for a while. You've been coming on the show really since the early days. You've been working as talent on broadcast. You've been doing analytical content on your YouTube channel. That's fantastic. You've been coaching a collegiate program. You've been coaching Virtuoso. So how did all of that amount to this gig with Fnatic?
I mean, it's kind of a culmination of all of the above is really what it boiled down to. I mean, I think the key thing is that I started doing my YouTube content and the analysis stuff like literally the second week that we had competitive events for Valorant. I did it before anyone else even was considering doing it, and that gave me a bit of a leg up. Like, people started to recognize me and know me as like the big numbers nerd who's currently working on Valorant stuff, and that managed to hold over many months into the future now, where I still have a fairly high reputation amongst coaches, other analysts, content creators, personalities. Like, people know me as like the numbers nerd, a deeply analytical person, and I've had a relationship with Mini and Boaster for the longest time. Like, really early on in Valorant's existence, I actually tied into the EU scene way more than I tied into the North American one, despite the fact that I'm US based. And so I've already had sort of those peripheral connections. Like, I've known them, I've known Doom, I've known Emil. Like, Sam knows all of this as well because she's in all of like the same chats and all the same channels, but I've known them for a long time. And so for us to be getting to a point now where the ecosystem's sort of coming to an even keel, everyone's getting their footings, they're now well settled at Fnatic, and I've sort of proven my worth on a team in North America that I sort of was part of from nothingness all the way up to a top 15 team in the region. They're looking at ways that they can expand, looking at ways that they can grow despite already having a world-class roster. And one of the ways was bringing in supplemental brain power to build out playbooks, develop protocols, really iron out the more minor details that they needed to hash out, compared to basically getting everything to the level of the players that they had, because their players are phenomenal. The leadership is phenomenal. The question was, how deep does the playbook go, and is it adequate to support those? And that's what I'm now sort of being brought in to do. So yeah, works out great.
Well, Dubros had a question in the chat, and it's literally my next question. So, hey, perfection. You mentioned, you know, you've always had a relationship with like Boaster and Mini and the rest of the guys. So basically, I guess that comes down to, what is the dynamic between you and Mini? What is that relationship like, particularly because he's been coaching the team pretty much since its inception?
So it's interesting. Like, there's a reason that my role isn't labeled as an analyst. I am so not an analyst, it's ridiculous. What I'm doing inside of the team, and sort of I wouldn't say a level of parity, but the level of respect and back and forth that exists between Mini is definitely conversations between two coaches. Like, there will be instances where I make entire first passes on playbooks, bring them to Mini, and then we build those out together. So it's not a situation where like I'm giving feedback here and there and he decides whether or not he's going to take it. It's, I'm making major strategic decisions and then we discuss whether or not those make sense. And it's more him verifying that I'm not off my rocker than it is him like overtly challenging stuff. So, I mean, it's a great relationship. I think he's been nothing but supportive thus far in terms of me bringing forth stuff that I believe and have seen work in extremely high levels of play, and him sort of working to support that that's something we need to focus on with the boys, and making sure that they have as much confidence as I do and Minnie does.
You've sort of already covered it to a degree, but let's get a little more into the specifics of like what being a strategic coach means. Are you in the server with the players? Are you in meetings with the players? How much of your relationship, how much of your workday, I suppose, is spent sort of on your own, looking at strats, building things out, and then bringing it to the team? Or how much of it is like actively working in the server with the crew?
I would say it's around half and half. I would say I spend a good half my day doing theory in like my templates for building out playbook stuff, VOD reviewing, seeing like how we're making decisions mid-round and whether or not that follows the protocols that we need in place. And then the other half is me in VOD reviews with the boys, me watching our scrims and sort of actively applying those things.
Okay.
Cool. So like you kind of mentioned what you do. So here, the next question, I suppose, is what are the key areas that you're going to be focusing on? How much of this can you actually tell us, obviously, but what would you say the key areas are that need to be improved?
So like I can give you easily enough, I can give you like the high level quick hit of probably the single biggest thing that was changed, which was as soon as I came on, and I have a sneaking suspicion this probably would have happened whether or not I had arrived when I did, which is we did like a soft overhaul of the way that the roles and agent pools exist within the team. I think that you have certain scenarios in that lineup where stuff just wasn't making a ton of sense in terms of how we were setting up our players to succeed. Like the reference I always go to is like, let's look at the BO5 that we played against Team Liquid and look at what Boaster had to play throughout that set. He went from Sova to Astra for 2 games, back to Sova, back to Astra. Astra and Sova are not similar characters. They don't play the same, they don't have similar abilities, nothing about them is alike, and yet we're having him switch between those 2 roles 3 times inside of a single series. We're not setting him up to succeed. That's just objectively not the way that he should be playing the game. And so how do we create an environment where the roles still make sense? We're limiting the amount of agents that players have to spread themselves across, but we're also doing it in a way that gives us an upper leg in our compositions, more broadly speaking.
Now, this is a question that again comes from Doom Bros in chat. Nice to have him here as our third questioner on hand. This is an interesting one always. As fans, we're constantly comparing the regions. As analysts, we're constantly comparing the regions. As a coach, what are the regions like? What's the difference between NA scrims and EU scrims to your field?
Oh, man. So this is like probably the single biggest thing that I'm currently adapting to is so many of my assumptions are based off of things that are done in NA that I am now seeing literally just don't happen in EU at all. Like I'll be like, oh, we have to play this default because like there's that standard play here. And many will be like, that standard play doesn't exist here. I'm like, what? All right.
With standard?
Well, in NA scrims, it's like, if you're in tier 1 NA scrim circles, you'll see this play at least twice a map. And he's like, yeah, no one does that here. I'm like, all right, sure. Adjustments will be made. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's the biggest thing. Like in terms of like the organizational level of scrims themselves, I mean, scrims are scrims. But in terms of like the actual content of the scrims, I mean, it's very interesting adapting between regional styles, and there's already some pretty pronounced differences.
Do you want to get one very important question in here real quick from chat? This comes from Yinsu. Would you rather fight one Boaster-sized Doma or one Doma-sized Boaster?
Oh, man. Oh, man.
I feel like a larger Boaster would be terrifying.
I agree, but have you seen Doma? I don't care what size he is, man. I'm gonna say a Boaster-sized Doma, just because hopefully he becomes small enough that I can finagle my way around that fight.
Well, we're not going to actually ask the next question, but just for the memes, I'm going to read it. Doombros asks, what is the best way to counter Fnatic asking for a friend?
See, that's the trick is you can't. Yeah.
Ah.
There you go.
Well,
it's not possible.
Kind of in that vein.
Trick question.
So Fnatic is coming off a fairly disappointing loss, missing
We're gonna
out
go
on
for the player
Berlin.
one.
How has that impacted the feeling in the team?
Honestly, like I think that it is the type of response that you want to see from a resilient team, which was everyone's just hungrier than they were before. Like they've tasted success. They obviously got to go to Iceland, and then to be as close as they were to Berlin and then come up short, it's like we've got to work harder. Like that's the mentality. It's not like oh, we missed out. It's we have to work harder, and that's the way you want it to be.
Now, you kind of already touched on this when we first talked about this news and how exciting it is for you. But it's a storyline that I think is always interesting, which is that Fnatic is a legacy organization, right? They're a storied organization. Even as new of a game as Valorant is, this is an org that carries so much history from League of Legends, from Counter-Strike, from a lot of different titles. What does that kind of a historical legacy mean for you coming on board?
Well, it's interesting because like my main game before I came over to Valorant was League of Legends. I've been a League player for 11 years. And so like I remember watching live when Fnatic won the first world championship. To then now be 10 years in the future and joining that organization is like, holy shit. Like there's no other way to put it. It's like a wow type of moment. So I mean it's incredible. It is absolutely incredible.
So you're kind of in a odd situation with the team. Currently top of the EMA leaderboard, but without a chance to get any more points. So does that mean that you're kind of rooting against the other EMEA teams at Berlin? Like, and also like you come from the NA region. So how are you feeling in terms of who to actually root for?
So the way that I see it is for the first 2 rounds of groups, I'm rooting really hard against Ascend, and at every moment thereafter, I'm rooting really hard for Ascend. Because I want them to either not make it out of groups or I want them to win. There's no in between. And
that makes a lot of sense actually.
If they don't make it out of groups, we're guaranteed champs. We're literally just in. So like that's why I feel the way I feel. Well, it's that or like G2 has to win the entire event is the only other way that we don't make it through to champs, which like no offense to G2, not thinking that's super likely. But yeah, it's funny because I don't necessarily like support or not support specific regions. I'm supportive of whatever means my guys succeeding and getting their best shots at what they want to achieve. So that's the thing that I care about, and who I have to support and or not support to get there is secondary.
Do you think that your stance as someone who's from NA but has been working a lot with EU teams in EU, now is actually employed by an EU team and paying attention to that scene, do you think that that sort of, shall I say, divorces you just a little bit from the geography and allows you to see things perhaps a bit more objectively than some of us?
I'd like to imagine so. So like I'm a North American based individual. I've lived in Maine basically my entire life. That's where I'm at. And I've worked with and been entrenched in EU for a long time. And at the same time as those, I've also been following the Chinese scene closer than any Western person I'm aware of, and have been following Japan and Korea incredibly closely. In terms of like a truly sweeping worldview of this game, there aren't a ton of people that I think have as removed and as objective a perspective as I do.
Yeah.
So this is kind of coming back to just coaching in general, but you obviously have a background in coaching. Although, like, that's not your main background. I think you said you came from finance.
Yep.
So, like, the statistical, analytical mind has always been there. And then you obviously headed up the Thomas College's esports program for over 2 years. So how would you say that initially the whole finance background and then being in collegiate has shaped your mentality as a coach? And how have you kind of, like, what is the difference in adapting from that, from the 2 stages and now with actual pro players?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting dynamic because while I did come from the finance industry professionally, labeling my experience there as finance is somewhat of a misnomer. I worked for like a small office equity firm that bought small businesses. So they'd like go find family-run businesses where the original founders were trying to get out. They'd purchase up these businesses and then optimize them, oftentimes functioning as basically consultants for those businesses. So like I did stuff for that. This wasn't me being like an investment banker on Wall Street. This was me like being deployed as the director of business optimization for a landscaping company for a year type of stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I was in the trenches, managing employees, holding executive level positions for a lot of these things. And so that was an interesting baseline in managerial experience. Like, you want to talk about blending my finance career into coaching. I was coaching and managing people even when I was in finance, even in the part of my career where I was like supposedly supposed to be like a spreadsheet gremlin. I was already managing people numbering in the dozens, 100+ employees. So that was something I was not unexposed to by any stretch of the imagination. Then moving into collegiate, it was sort of a natural blend. Like, I've been a competitive person playing on competitive teams my entire life. I was a nationally qualified sprint swimmer through high school and college. I was part of a children's circus for more than a decade where I was an instructor. There's a fun fact for you.
Wow. Okay.
And so, yeah.
Did
so
I that?
Yeah. So I was not in any way, shape, or form unfamiliar to like best coaching practices, how to motivate people, how to get the best out of individuals who are working or playing under you. And so to then bring those skills and elevate them to the pro esports ecosystem, it's quite easy, to be honest. Like, if anything, I think it actually gets easier. I think that the more professional the environment becomes, the more reliably you can depend on the people you're coaching to have the mentalities that you need, just to sort of go about your business. Like, I don't have to question anyone on Fnatic's motivations. I know that if I tell them they need to do something or we need to achieve something a certain way, they're just going to do it because they care as much about getting it as I do. And you can't necessarily rely on that as much when you drop down to like the collegiate level, because they've got so many other things on their plate that whether or not they're sort of tunnel visioned and their goals are perfectly aligned with what you're trying to achieve within the esports program, like that's not remotely as assured as it is here. So it's an interesting dynamic overall, but one that I'm super comfortable with and one that feels more natural than it probably ever has.
Well, apologies for my quick absence there. I had some plumbers who were supposed to be here in an hour and a half decide that now was the time to knock on my door. Yeah. Always delightful. I wish it was a pizza. One last question here. We'll wrap up with this because Yinsu is demanding it in chat. Okay. Very a critical question here. Who do you think is the better Martin? You or Magnum? And also, I guess Reckles gets thrown in there too. Who is best Martin?
It depends on the field of bestness that we are currently analyzing.
Oh, God. You had to ask an analyst a question like that. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, this is clearly the most analytical.
Define best.
And nope, that's the question. Look, I don't write the questions. Chat does.
Listen, if somebody asked me this question about the best Samantha, I would say me, obviously, because like, you know,
I've got the answer. I have to give it to Magnum because of that beautiful smile.
There you go. That's a very diplomatic answer. All right, we're going to move on here. As much fun as the chat questions have been, we're running up against our time as we usually do. And we got some other stuff to talk about. Something that was unveiled today in particular that I very much want to talk about, which is we're getting a new map. Fracture. It's going to be very interesting, to be quite frank, based on what's being discussed about the layout. We've just seen a few screenshots so far, but it is apparently going to be an H-shaped map, meaning that defender spawn will be in the center, and then there will be two sides to the map completely separated, and the attackers will be able to approach from either direction, which is just, my CS brain is like, just, there's a new wrinkle forming. It's just going through 3 different dimensions trying to think about this and process it. So I want to get your guys' takes just on the what this could be here, Anders. How do you feel about an H map?
I have no idea what to expect here. Like, so assuming you have an H shape and the defender spawn is in the center, does that mean that the attackers have one unified spawn point, or do the attackers have two spawn points? Like, where's the attackers spawn in that H shape where it makes logical sense?
I would assume that by H, it basically means like, think of it as not necessarily being actually the letter H, but think of it as being like the center point is going to be defender spawn, right? And then there's basically two isolated sides to the map.
Two big silos.
So it's more like
on
having the approach towards like an A and a B side on, say, bind, but having them, the way I'm thinking about it is, you know what spatchcocking a chicken is? It's where you take a chicken
I actually do.
and you break it along the sternum for chat and lay it flat in order to cook it. It cooks much quicker and you can do different things with it. So I'm picturing this as
you have to do
like,
it with quail, otherwise it overcooks in like 2 minutes.
Yes. I'm picturing this as being like spatchcocking a map where they're going to take like the traditional layout of a map is like defender spawn on top, attacker spawn on bottom, right? A whole bunch of shit in the middle, and usually some sort of a mid and approaches to the different sites. Right? That's how you sort of basically think of a map. I'm picturing it as they're cutting the map down mid, spatchcocking it along mid, and stretching it out to either side. So you're going to have attackers approaching from either side of the map and moving in towards the sites. I don't think it's necessarily going to be like an H where there's like 4 potential
a literal
ends
H
from.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know until we get the layout.
It's going to be
also,
a wild
like,
map.
Where does the spike spawn? Do you get to decide?
Yeah, so
like
basically, my understanding, again, and this is very much conjecture, is that all of the attackers will spawn in one spot. But what they do is in the warm-up phase and the buy phase, they've got zip lines that go across the map underground that basically are not connected to the rest of the map, but means that they can start from either side, which is really interesting to me because on the one hand, it means, yes, you can start from either side. But on the other hand, I'm almost thinking it might be better for defenders because it might make rotating from either approach a bitch for attackers to do in terms of just taking a very long time.
Also, how noisy is it going to be? Like, will you be able to hear people zipping?
Just hear people zip lining under.
Yeah. So that to my mind brings
under
back,
the map at all times.
It's Vertigo from CS, where if you make noise while rotating on Vertigo, you could basically be tracked through the floor anywhere, right? Like there's because there's verticality and things stacked up. If you're rotating from an A to a B hit and you're not walking it, you can be heard the whole time by defenders or by CTs, and they can just track you. So I'm thinking it might behave like that, where like once you get that audio cue as a defender, you're like, okay, they're rotating. But then could that be faked? Could that be abused? Like this is gonna get weird if the audio cue can be heard from Zip. I'm not sure if that's gonna be viable.
It sounds like there's a really good chance that like on the sides of the map where the attackers choose to start, like you're committed to that. Better be happy with which side you decided to quote unquote spawn on, because things are going to be dicey from there if there are like huge audio cues like that.
Riot's map design with some of these new maps, where every time they're like, all right, what is our new thing that's just going to be very different from anything we've done before? It feels like, have you guys read the book Anderzz Game?
Yeah.
Okay, both you nodding. Good. So you know how in the battle room, the whole thing is like every time he goes into a different battle, they're throwing some new curveball at him to try and make him completely reevaluate how to approach the fight. That's what I feel like Riot's map designer is. Like, oh, you guys figured out Breeze? Well, what about this? You guys figured out Icebox? What if there were 2 sides to the map completely isolated? Oh, you think you know how to play this map? Now the attackers spawn above you and parachute in. What are you going to do now?
I love it.
I genuinely feel like there's just somebody in map design for Riot who's just like, let me fuck with them this way today.
I mean, it keeps it interesting, so that's good, I guess.
The map design department, when they were just starting with the very first maps in the game, they made a list of ludicrous plot twists and like map elements, put them on a giant spinning wheel, and whenever they need a new map, they're just like you know what? We'll make an H-shaped map.
This one has mounts in it. Like,
yes, give me mounts in Valorant, mounted combat. I'm so in for that. Imagine the run and gun on a horseback.
They're gonna unleash a knife that's just a lance. It'll just be a full-on lance as the new knife in the battle pass. It's just madness. It is so interesting. This is one of those that I just feel like we're gonna have to see an execution, right? Because there's the concept of an 8-chip map is just so radical to me that I need to see how it actually plays out. But my hot take is everyone thinks this is gonna make attackers OP. My hot take is that this is going to be a defender-sided map because the rotation between either side hit is gonna be so brutally long for the attackers to do. That's my hot take, having never seen the map. That's just right off the rip. No knowledge, no information, pure speculation. All right, let's move on down because again, time is short and precious. But the Knights August monthly happened. We've got a couple events to run through. There's nothing too substantial, obviously, because we're all waiting on Berlin. That'll be next week's show where we'll do a little Berlin preview, and then it'll happen, which is very exciting. But talking about the Knights August monthly, that one Sam was casting up till late last night, and it wound up being Complexity losing in the final to Squirtle Squad of Psalm, Harmful, Jonah, Governor, and Ban. Sam, how did this event go?
I think it was really interesting seeing how a lot of these teams performed. I will say that there was a big disappointment from Virtuoso. Like, Anderzz left and they all just like fell apart. It was really sad.
He's just a magic.
I was expecting them
formula.
to do a little bit
Golden
better.
Goose.
Honestly. Renegades going down to YFP was also like a pretty notable result. Renegades have been kind of top of the tier 2 scene for a while. I mean, we've known how good YFP are. And then Mafia came in, who is like this kind of a pug team of players from a bunch of other different teams that had been let go. People like, I'm trying to remember, I think it was like Critical and like Dim Sum Boy. So like there were a couple of different players that come together and they did exceptionally well. They actually got 3rd place beating out Knights. So some really, really solid results across the board. I think that there are a lot of teams that have shown some incredible improvement over the last few weeks. Most notable one for me is Complexity. I know that after our interview with AGM last week, I posted some of those interviews on Reddit, and like they were getting so much hate. And then we had the community gaming tournament, which we're going to talk about in a bit. And then we had this Knights tournament, and like they had some really solid results. They kept showing up consistently. They're looking really good, much better than they had been previously, especially with Valen absolutely dominating, and Brock as well, a fantastic pickup there. And like on top of all of that, they had serious internet issues. I think at one point in the community gaming one, their manager had to sub in, and they still had like an amazing upper bracket run. Like, I was really impressed with the improvement they've made.
Yeah, we've been having these little hurricane things in the U.S. Been causing a lot of problems for a lot of people, unfortunately. So I think that was a big part of the internet issues over the last week for various players. Is you know, phone lines are getting knocked down, and everyone's having a real good time with that. Just casual little hurricanes. Did you get a chance to check this out, Anders? Were you watching your old team, like, you know, hand on the photograph, like, do well?
Oh.
Yeah, I watched the event. It was interesting because, sort of to Sam's point, it felt like a lot of the tier 2, like tier 1 bridge teams that have been staples for a long time, like, kind of got slapped around a little bit. Renegades went out early. Sonics went out really early. I mean, Knights didn't go out early, but obviously they didn't even make it into the final. And so, like, that's fairly shocking. I mean, if you were to look at that bracket beforehand 2 weeks ago and you're like, all right, which teams do you expect in the final? I mean, half of the people who are super familiar with NA Tier 2 would have been like, oh, it's a Sonics Renegades final. It's easy. Because that's what it's been for the last 3 months. So to see them both go out early to teams that are fairly new-ish is great. I mean, that, like, watching other teams sort of start to challenge their sort of gatekeeping of tier 1 that has existed for a while now is nice to see.
Can I also just say, I know this is kind of a done topic in Valorant for some reason, but I don't understand why. And this isn't a criticism of the Knights in particular, but I don't understand why the community at large is super okay with teams running their own team in their own event. Like, it's apparently just accepted practice in Valorant, dating back to like Ignition series, where we would have like FaZe run an event and FaZe would be in the event, and, you know, so on and so forth. But I just don't get it, right? If you're running an event, you should not own a team that's participating in the event. That's just fundamentally, to my view, a problem with competitive integrity.
This is a
Sam?
very NA thing because it doesn't happen in EU. When RixGG runs the Huntress Trials, RixGG Lightning not allowed to compete. Goosehouse is having Birds of Prey this weekend. The Goosehouse FE team not allowed to compete. Dignitas ran a Game Changers event and Dignitas were allowed to compete. When I spoke to Rix and I was like, yo, you guys have been in the FE scene, you know, what's happening? They said, well, we bid for it, but they told us that if we did, then our team wouldn't be allowed to compete. And I was like, what? Like, this is an NA thing. EU does not have this problem. Y'all are the problem.
I don't get it. And no one cares is the other thing. Like, it's not even a conversation topic anymore unless I'm bringing it up right here. And I don't understand how that's not a concern for anybody.
I mean, it's like an obvious conflict of interest, but at the same time, I think the overwhelming attitude is we don't want to give people any reason not to run events. And it's funny that Sam's like, this is not an EU problem. EU also doesn't have events. Hate to say it. Like, I mean, hate to put it that bluntly, but like, yes, EU doesn't have this problem, but EU also doesn't have the equivalent of like a Knights monthly, assuming that you like parallel Rix or LVP more closely to like an NSG monthly or whatever. But like, that's at least how I've always perceived it. Is there a glaring conflict of interest here? You betcha. Would I rather have this event than nothing? Yes. So you have to give and take a little bit.
I will say also, and I don't know because this didn't get put into practice, so I don't know what Knight's policy would have been on this. If you do have your own team running in the event and there's any sort of dispute that requires admin input, your team loses the dispute. Has to be the way it's done. Has to be the way it's done. Doesn't matter the circumstance. Like if there's a dispute over a match result or a server or this, that, or the other thing, your team loses the challenge. It has to be the way it's done. It's the only way to not have an issue with that conflict of interest. So anyways, talking about the Community Gaming Premier Series Final, which is a very long title. Very long title. Like, I don't know. Again, this is one of my other gripes with Valorant tournaments. Guys, simplify it. 3 words or less. That you don't need four or 5 words to say a tournament. That's too many words. It's just too many. And it's like every Valorant tournament. VCT is the worst example of it. This is the Valorant Champions Tour, Challengers Series, Final 3, Playoffs 4, Qualifier. Just stop. Just stop. Cut like half of that. Throw it in the trash. Come up with better names for things. Come on. Anyway, Immortals win this one. Complexity is again the bridesmaid, never the bride, but they are still placing high repeatedly. And it's interesting that Immortals did so well here because they did so poopy in the Knights event, getting knocked out fairly early on to Devise. So, I mean, what do we feel about this result? Anderzz, did you check this one out?
I did, and this one was really interesting because Immortals did well, but not without the bumps in the road. So Lynn, one of Virtuoso's player, subbed in for a roster, actually beat Immortals in I think it was either in the group stage or like the first round of playoffs. YFP. He was subbing for YFP and knocked them to lowers first round. And so like they did great. They made it back to the final, but like that was a little bit scary that a team with a sub just immediately dunked you to the lower bracket. Is probably a bit of a wake-up call, but it was a great event overall. You had a lot of great names. I mean, this is the 3rd and final installment of the CG Premier Series. So like this has been just another example of like the great breadth that the NA Tier 2 scene has.
Yeah.
I think the interview series that they were running between games was really great. Yeah. That spoiler alert, I did those.
Kind of had a hunch on that one.
There you go.
I will be honest in that I did not get to check that out, but I might have to go back and watch some of those interviews if you were doing them. Always interesting to check out the interviews, get players' opinions behind the scene. We got one more event to talk about here, Birds of Prey 2. This one, again, is going to be happening, and a certain someone sitting in the middle with very purple hair is going to be casting it. So Sam, talk to us about the Birds of Prey 2.
So the first Birds of Prey, again, it's Goosehouse Gaming. They have their own FE team. Their team is not allowed to compete. It's very sad. But their players, some of their players are competing on like pug teams. So that at least there's like some concession in a sense. The first Birds of Prey was really, really small. This one, I believe, actually has some Riot backing as well. So getting involved there, giving their support to the FE scene. And it's pretty exciting. And I think that this is one of those things that people should be coming to check out, because I don't know how many more FE tournaments are going to be happening, but also there have been a lot of rumblings about an EU game changes. Nothing confirmed yet, but like we had Halo tweeting about it. We had one of the ladies from one of the content creators from Fnatic saying, we might get an EU game changer, so I want to make a team. And like everyone started bombarding her DMs, and she had to like make a new tweet to say, guys, I don't actually know anything about it. I just want to make a team, relax. But like, I don't know if I believe that. So it seems very likely that game changers is coming soon. And if that is the case, this could be your last opportunity to actually see some of these teams in action. And there's going to be like really cool orgs. Oxygen is there, Supermassive Blaze, FE is going to be there. I'm waiting to see if XZ signs up, because they've been doing really well recently. 10 Star Nova is going to be involved. So there's some really good teams, and yeah, like just come watch.
I definitely hope. I mean, it makes complete sense for there to be a game changers in EU. I'm honestly surprised there hasn't been one yet. Is really the most surprising factor of this, because we've done them in NA, right? We've had 2. There's been one, I believe, in South America as well. There's a Brazilian one, I think.
Brazil, yeah.
Yeah, so the EU would be the natural region to pop one in as they continue to expand that campaign around the world. But we'll see. It is very exciting. I think that's going to wrap up our show here. We're running up against our hour mark. Anderzz, thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations again on the new gig. Is there anything you want to plug before we say adieu?
Not much. I mean, obviously you can find me all across the internet at the normal places, and you can follow me and the new squad through the rest of LVP. We're sort of getting reps in as a full roster now, implementing sort of the systems and strategies that I'm bringing to the team. So you can catch us in that through this next week.
Sam, I mean, you pretty much already just got your plug of Watch Birds of Prey. With a certain Sam casting it. And I think that's going to wrap up our show here. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Be sure to tune in every week at 1 p.m. Eastern for Press 4 to Defuse, your weekly spot for Valorant esports news and discussion. We'll see you next time.